Hello, everyone, and welcome to another MTE recap here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. Tonight, we are recapping the Fort Myers tip off that took place down in Florida Monday and Wednesday of Feast Week. We've got the Michigan Wolverines, Xavier Musketeers, South Carolina Gamecocks, and the Virginia Tech Hokies. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. So, Joe, your Michigan Wolverines were involved in this one. They opened up things with a pretty wire to wire, maybe shaky a little bit at the end victory against Virginia Tech. But considering where the Hokies are projected to be, this was a must win for Michigan, and they got the job done.
Yeah, Sean, it did not look good, honestly, for the first 30 minutes of this game. Trading leads with the team that's probably going to be the bottom of the ACC on a neutral floor. This would not have been at best, this would have been a quad three loss, perhaps. Yeah, probably a quad three loss, to be honest, but not something Michigan needed, especially with the way Wake Forest has looked. But getting off that point, I do want to talk about the game here. I thought this was Roddy Gale Jr.'s coming out party. I think through the first uh, 5 games of the year for Michigan. We saw glimpses of what Roddy was at Ohio State, which is someone who's really good at getting to the basket, making plays, drawing fouls. This was the game it completely came to a head, especially in a day where uh, they just couldn't buy any threes. I mean, they hurled so many threes at the beginning of the game. They were like 1 of 8 to start. And even guys like Sam Walters, who's one of the best catch and shooters in the country, he was missing threes. And that's what allowed Virginia Tech. They at one point led by 9 in the first half, and into halftime, it was amazing if Michigan could obtain the lead. And that was through great bench play through Will Cheddar, L.J. Kaysen, and Reuben Jones. Those were three guys that, without them, Michigan would not have won this game or even kept it close, quite frankly, in the first half. The first 10 minutes was more of the same, to be honest. Virginia Tech was making a bunch of ridiculous shots. I thought some of their three-pointers they took were completely ridiculous, and basically, even though they were only 4 of 17, three of those four were like contested and a shot clock threes. I do want to highlight Toby Lawal. He was their best player by far, and Jaden Young off the bench. Those two guys completely put it to Michigan in the first 30, but the last 10 was the Michigan we saw in the last 50 minutes of their tournament. A team that was efficient, getting to the line, and one that could beat you in multiple different ways. Vlad Golden, although he only had 8 points in this game, he did a great job rim protecting. Uh, Virginia Tech did not go in there with ease, which is why they settled for a lot of bad threes and a lot of bad contested twos. And then Roddy Gale Jr. getting fouled, getting to the line, finishing plays, and Trey Donaldson too, being an effective quarterback, even though he did not have a great night on the stat sheet. Only two guys in double figures for Michigan shot. A lot of other guys with 8, 9, 9, and 7 points, and that's what got it done for them. Definitely not a pretty performance, actually a pretty bad performance, but they found a way to win against a team that's probably going to pull off a few upsets. I know Virginia Tech isn't good, but they're dangerous enough where if they play a tournament team having an off night, they'll definitely pick them off.
And Joe, Michigan gets the victory here. They cover their analytical spread, so Ken Pom and Bart Torvik got a lot better after this game. And as expected, they took care of business here. All right, in the other semifinal, we had Xavier going up against South Carolina. The Gamecocks were struggling coming into this one. A bye game loss to North Florida, lost to Indiana on the road, which was not close. They fall to 3-3 with a loss here. And Xavier, despite losing at halftime, does get the job done here. At the time, this improved them to 6-0. Zach Freemantle leading the way with 16 points. Um, you're starting to see why Xavier was ranked in a game like this, where they play a pretty bad half, and yet they still cruise to a 9-point victory. But, Joe, considering how bad the Big East has looked, you have to think Xavier is probably one of the better teams in that league.
Yeah, I think outside of their performance, which we'll talk about in a second here, they've looked really strong. And this is another team that gets quality minutes for their bench, whether it's John Hughley, Jerome Hunter, the former Hoosier. That's a familiar name I know for you, Sean, and a lot of our listeners. And then Zach Freemantle and Dalen Swain. I thought this game, they combined for 30 points. And they were efficient, 6 of 8 and 5 of 7 for each of them, taking good shots. And it kind of allowed a bad game for Ryan Combo, at least shooting 4 of 14 from the field, 2 of 8 from three, something that was not common. It kind of gave him the ability to just be more of a creator and to not worry so much. And I think with Swade and Fremantle, particularly in the second half, South Carolina didn't have a good response, and they still couldn't leave a guy like Conwell or McKnight open either. So I think looking at this game for Xavier, it was kind of like Michigan's a really bad first half, but a second half where there's too many ways for there are a lot more ways for Xavier to beat you than there are for you to beat them if you're not at a talent advantage or at least a talent equivalent. So Xavier gets it done, and up to this point, they were the only one of the few undefeated Big East teams. I think
And
the only Big East team undefeated.
I think DePaul's still there, Joe.
Oh,
Surprisingly
really?
enough, yeah, they've doubled their win total from last year. But Mike and I did do a video on the Big East, and it didn't include the championship game here that Xavier played, but we did talk about the struggles in the rest of the league between Villanova, UConn, and Creighton,
Seton Hall.
and Seton Hall. Well, it's actually looking a little better for Seton Hall than it did. They got out of their MTE at 2-1, and UConn didn't, and Creighton's 0-2, and UConn's 0-3. So I think Xavier won't have to be anything crazy here, Joe, to be a 7 seed in the tournament, top 4 finish in the Big East, and what comes up next will turn out good for your Wolverines. In terms of South Carolina here, Joe, it's pretty clear that they've taken a step back from their 6th seed last year in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, they lost Michi Johnson back to Ohio State. The only real player that they have on their team is Colin Murray Boyles, and when he has a bad game, Joe, it is pretty much curtains for South Carolina. So the Gamecocks might see a lot more struggles than some of the successes they saw last year.
Yeah, Sean. Just kind of disappointing for them because they did have some expectation, but I do think December is going to be a big month of reassessing before they ultimately enter a full-on SEC slate, which, from what I see, is might be pretty brutal.
And Joe, they did salvage 3rd place in this. These are probably 2 non-tournament teams playing. We don't have to talk about this for very long, but South Carolina led by 8 at halftime, and they pretty much cruised to a wire-to-wire victory here. You did get 16 and 8 from Murray Boyles, Ukasuk and Davis adding 12 off the bench. In terms of South Carolina, they do have a couple of tough games here before conference play starts. They go on the road to Boston College, who just lost to Dartmouth today. They play Clemson at home. That could turn out to be a pretty good win. And then a couple other bye games before you start off your SEC season with ranked Mississippi State, ranked Alabama, and ranked Auburn. So, Joe, if you get through there with a couple victories, maybe your season's looking a whole lot different. But South Carolina has to settle for a salvage at 3rd place.
Yeah, Sean. From based on what I saw from both teams, definitely not their best foot forward, and a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers for these teams.
All right, in terms of the championship game here, Joe, these were the 2 that we expected to be in there, and the result was not what we expected. Michigan rolls to a 25-point victory, 78-53 here. The Wolverines led by 11 at halftime and then pulled away quickly there in the second half. Danny Wolf with 20 and 14, his best game of the season, and just 3 turnovers, which is a low number for him. You got a good Trey Donaldson performance, Vlad Golden adding a lot of points. Joe, I don't think it was crazy to see Michigan winning this game against Xavier, but the margin was shocking. Probably the best victory in the conference so far, considering the quality of opponent and the margin of victory.
Yeah, Sean, I thought Michigan was extremely thorough in this game. I think this is the kind of game where the Twin Towers of Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. I think this is exactly what Dusty May had in mind. Danny Wolf in the first half was phenomenal, had 18 points. It was like 4 of 5 from 3 in the first half as well. I mean, sorry, 3 of 4. He was making everything. He was draining threes, getting to the basket, facilitating for guys like Namari Burnett and Roddy Gale. And even though his teammates didn't convert on all of those, you could tell Xavier had a huge problem. I mean, they burned 2 timeouts in the first half, in large part due to Danny Wolf. And what was so important about Danny Wolf getting in there was Vlad Golden played very sparing minutes. I think it was 3 or 4 in the first half because he picked up 2 fouls. So the fact they were able to roll him in there, pair him up with Will Cheddar, who gave very good minutes, not necessarily scoring wise, but who gave really good like 15 minutes off the bench in the first half. I thought that was phenomenal from Michigan and Dusty May. And then The only thing that even kept this game remotely competitive for the middle portion was Ryan Conwell. He was 5 of 9 from three, but of those five threes, four of those were contested. One was a half court, like a halftime buzzer beater that was contested, and three of them were like one was a bank shot and two were with hands in the face. So that's my way of saying nicely that this game could have been a lot worse for Xavier. I thought Zach Fremantle was extremely ineffective, 0 of 5 from three. They couldn't get Swain going after the great night he had on Monday, and the bench really did nothing. John Hughley had like one basket, and then Jerome Hunter, Trey Green, Dante Maddox Jr. It's like they didn't even play in this game, Sean. And contrary Michigan wise, you had Sam Walters, even though he didn't score, give quality time. LJ Kaysen, who's been proven to be a matchup nightmare for his limited minutes, and then Reuben Jones with his defense. And these are two teams that can beat you in a lot of different ways, but I think Michigan's proven, especially in this game, they can beat you in a lot more ways than Xavier. When threes aren't clicking for Xavier, they got a problem. When threes aren't clicking for Michigan, they still have guys like Ronnie Gale Jr., like they did on Monday, but he didn't have to do anything this game. He was 2 of 9, probably had a pretty bad game for the field. And then you had guys like Trey Donaldson hit big shots, Namari Burnett hit big shots, and Vlad Golden in the second half looked like the Vlad Golden I expected to put on my first team. Rim protecting, scoring 18 points, finally dunking. The first 6 games of the year, he refused to dunk. Dunking, finishing, blocking, and he finally like rushed into his sets, which is a good thing. So overall, Sean, it's hard to not think Michigan's playing like a top 5 team in the conference. Not the country, but definitely the conference.
Yeah, Joe, this is sort of how the Dusty May offense can work. Xavier's a very physical defensive team, and when you can spread the floor with good spacing and bigs who can shoot it, that's how Michigan is going to score efficiently this year. I don't think posting it up to Golden and throwing it down low to Wolf and letting him just try and run through these bigs in the Big Ten, I don't think that's really going to work. But leaning on some guards, maybe some pick and pops or some mid ranges, I think that's how Michigan is going to score this year. And this is a win, Joe, that I think is going to age very well for Michigan. Xavier is, like I said, I think they're probably the second best team in the Big East so far. And while that might not mean much, they'll probably be in the top 25, maybe jump in and out this year. They have a couple really tough games in December. So if they can win those, then the win makes Michigan look even better. But Joe, this is the first time where it really all kind of clicked for Dusty May, and the other teams in the conference have to be watching this with a little more attention than they probably thought they'd be given to Michigan at this point in the year. We are going to do our Big Ten repower rankings likely next week after all the Feast Week tournaments wrap up. And I'll be curious to see, Joe, where we have Michigan and how much stock are we putting into these early good starts by teams like Wisconsin and Michigan, and how much stock we're putting into some of these early struggles like Indiana and Northwestern. So that is the Fort Myers tip-off. Joe, your Michigan Wolverines win the MTE, and that's all we have for you here in this video. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this MTE recap. Be sure to check out the other ones if you haven't so already. There's going to be plenty more here coming out as Feast Week rolls to an end here on Black Friday. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.